They thought it was luck. They whispered that a single lucky shot had somehow found a man where no one else could. They talked about distance and wind like it was a magic trick. But luck does not explain the record in my file or the tactics that changed how patrols move through the Delta. My name is Adalbert F. Waldron. For a short, terrible stretch in 1969, I was a rifleman in the Mekong Delta. When I left, the official tally read 109 confirmed kills. The shot everyone remembers, the near 900-meter hit from a moving boat, sits in the files as a single line. What that line does not show is everything that made the shot possible. The countless hours of observation, the small decisions, the river lessons, the tools, and the men beside me. If you want true war history told by facts, not myths, stay with me. If this is the kind of history you want, hit like. It helps people who respect the record find the truth. At 14:07 on one humid afternoon in 1969, our patrol boat slid along a narrow channel near Sai Bay, reeds brushing the hull, mangroves locking out the sun. The boat hummed, men were quiet. A crewman at the bow squinted and then pointed upward to a line of trees on the bank. "Movement up high," he said. Not a shout, a small report, like a man who didn't want whatever he'd seen to know he'd seen it. In theater reports that day, the entry is short and clinical. Engagement, 900 Mets, confirmed hit. It reads like an invoice. I remember the rhythm of the boat. I remember timing a breath to the hull's pause. I remember the man falling. They called it a miracle. I call it method. But before we go into the afternoon, you need to understand the environment. The Mekong Delta is not a place you conquer once. It's a place that keeps you awake. The Delta rewrites a man's senses. The smells, mud, rot, wet earth baking under sun, become a map. The sounds, insects, frogs, distant motors, are the Delta's pulse. At night, a patrol boat is a moving shadow. To them, to us, it is a target and a warning. Our unit was part of the Mobile Riverine Force, a joint Army-Navy operation designed to control the water. We ran PBRs and other small craft. We worked with infantry and helicopters. Think of it like a machine with many arms. Think of the river as the space the machine had to dominate. The enemy knew the river. They used trees, elevated hides, reed beds, and sampans. They could be almost invisible until they fired. I did not become a sniper overnight. I had served years before in the Navy. I had shot, practiced, learned to steady my hands. The Army noticed a steady shooter and sent me into situations where steadiness could stop a squad's casualty count from climbing. In Vietnam, that translates to being posted on bows of boats, elevated positions, or concealed over watch sites for patrols and river moves. The weapon changed depending on need. An accurized M14, an M21 when it was available, occasionally especially, prepared rifle with a scope tuned to the conditions. The principle never changed. The first shot must count. On the day that ends up in books, the target was high in a tree and almost a kilometer away. That distance is abstract if you've never measured wind by ripple, leaf drift, and the river's cross current. On water, you can't trust the same gauges you use on land. Smoke doesn't rise the same. Grass measurements don't exist. You read the water. You read the bow. You measure the tiny interval when the hull steadies between two motions. That's the moment you make warm steel and human judgment come together. I remember the routine we had built. A shooter and a spotter as a basic unit. Two men working to increase the probability of a correct first shot. The spotter watches for mirage, for heat shimmer, for the angle the target is framed against the horizon. Spotters marked range by map reference, by binoculars, by known points along the riverbank. We trained to estimate distances by reference and then confirm with laser rangefinders or map plotting when possible. On the boat, you supplemented instruments with feel. Transfer the boat's rhythm into your timing. The Mekong teaches you to be patient. There are long stretches of nothing. There are sudden flares. A sniper's day is measured in hours of waiting and the edges of seconds when you press the trigger. The records will always list the shots, but the waiting is where kills are made or lost. You wait until your target creates a consistent reference, until the hull pauses, until the crosswind that had been gathering aligns with your aim so you can compensate. Tactical decisions were mostly mundane, and they added up. Choose a position with a clear line of sight. Use concealment that blends you into the river's edge. Mangrove roots, reed shadows, the dark of a boat's hull. Account for parallax errors on the scope caused by humidity and temperature. If you are firing from a modestly magnified optic, like a 3.9x or an older 2.5x, you adjust your actual hold accordingly. Account for the effect of a moving platform on bullet trajectory. The relative motion of the boat has to be converted into angular compensation. We practiced barrel care until cleaning was ritual. Salt and humidity will eat iron. A fouled barrel is a liar. It changes your point of impact with each shot as the heat builds and humidity shifts. Guns were not just weapons, they were instruments that needed maintenance in the field to be trusted at long range. I kept spare parts and tools. I learned to check the mounts, the rings, the recoil pad seating, the bedding of the stock. Those details matter far more than any romantic notion about the man and the rifle. The 900-meter shot is raw on the page, but it was the product of dozens of chapters that came before. My record shows many nights and days of interdiction work, canal security, overwatch for river marches, coordinated strikes with infantry and air, assets. There were missions where we watched for hours and nothing happened. There were missions where small, rapid engagements left us with bodies on both sides. Patrols depended on the suppression of observation, meaning if the enemy feared observation, they moved differently, more cautiously, and that changed the operational tempo. Men in our boat joked about a shooter's luck because humor shields fear. I've heard that line 100 times. If he can hit that, I'll buy him a drink. Nervous laughter. The truth is, men say things to keep the dark from pressing in. They also pay attention. They learn quickly who does the work that keeps them alive. Being a shooter in the Delta means adjusting not only for wind and drift, but also for the human factor. The enemy adapts. When we took one tree position, they tried a different tree. When mortars would fall on a suspected position, they adapted and moved their observation points. That forced us to be unpredictable. We moved positions, we worked at different times, we used feints and misdirection. Most of this is in the after-action reports as dry lines. Observation suppressed, engagement prevented, enemy movement altered. Those are not sensational words, but commanders read them because those lines equal fewer friendly casualties. I was not alone. Sniping in the Delta was a team exercise consisting of boat crews, spotters, radio men, and the infantry coordination that gave us the power to act on what we saw. For the 900-meter engagement, we were in a small group, the boat in staggered formation with support craft. The spotter on my right called range, the helmsman kept throttle steady, and behind us men read for signs of secondary fire. In a riverine environment, you always plan for immediate extraction or suppression if you reveal yourself. When I made the shot, the sequence was simple. Range estimation, wind reading, wait for the hull's micro-pause, steady on a breathing point, break in that micro-pause, observe impact. The man fell. The verification that followed took minutes. We watched the body tumble and disappear in foliage, noted the exact location, and radioed confirmation. For the journalists, it became a sensational soundbite. For the patrol, it was a small but vital change. Men stopped moving along that specific bank for days. That tactical change saved lives. But the famous shot is only a symbol. The record shows more than that one engagement. It shows a pattern of operations where effectiveness matters. It took many small victories in suppression and interdiction to produce the strategic effect. Freedom of movement for friendly units, reduction of ambushes, and fewer casualties in convoys and patrols. You cannot do this work without fear. Fear is a human thing. It sharpens reflexes if you let it. It paralyzes if you let it. Training taught me to convert fear into a checklist. Breathe, verify, adjust, act. That disassembles panic into manageable steps. The first time the recoil cracked at night, my body wanted to jump. I had to teach it to wait and to be precise. The same goes for every other man who took a rifle into a position where a single mistake could mean death. My record in those months is not a fairy tale. It is an accumulation of official confirmed contacts, engagements that were verified by observation or reports. The 109 confirmed figure is recorded in unit logs and later referenced in historical accounts. Those numbers are not trophies in my hands. They are entries and reports that indicate a consistent tactical effect. They led to change doctrine in some units. They produced training notes, and they taught commanders what could be achieved when sniping was integrated into riverine operations. The unit I belonged to, the 9th Infantry Division, faced one of the most complex terrains in Vietnam. Villages bled into tree lines, footpaths disappeared into water. The enemy moved in small groups, often in sampans or on hidden mud ridges. They used civilians for cover and knew which banks were safe for them to operate from. The sniping efforts sought to make no bank safe anymore. We did that by raising the perceived risk of movement along certain routes. Change the enemy's behavior, and you alter the battlefield. After several decisive engagements, higher command asked whether we could replicate the method. The result was a greater emphasis on training marksmen not only to shoot, but to operate in riverine settings, timing shots from moving platforms, coordinating with boats, understanding river currents and crosswinds. These lessons were written up and fed back into training at Fort Benning and in unit debriefs. The mechanics of converting a once-in-a-while marksman into a consistent operational asset require discipline and repetition. Teach the mechanics, rehearse the reactions, and keep the equipment ready. Equipment matters. The M14 and M21 family had specific pros and cons. The M14, with its heavier round, offered long-range potential but required careful handling and more maintenance in salty, humid environments. The M21 was more ergonomically suited for sniper work when it was available. Optics were a variable challenge. Older scopes fogged, had limited magnification, and could suffer from parallax in our conditions. Starlight scopes helped at night, but changed the way shadows behaved in the sight picture. You learned to compensate in the moment. The river also tested logistics, ammunition resupply, cleaning supplies, spare parts, and the patience to field strip and maintain a rifle after a long run. The smallest negligence could produce a shifted zero. In action, you don't get to blame the environment. You either adapt or risk being ineffective. One of the realities the records show is that a man with a rifle is effective only when supported by a larger system. Boats providing maneuver, radios for coordination, infantry for follow-up. When those elements existed, our effect multiplied. When they did not, a lone shooter was merely a nuisance, not a strategic lever. Part of my work was teaching those connections. I spent time with commanders explaining how to integrate Overwatch and how to make a sniper's presence count without exposing him needlessly. There were moments of acute danger that never make the press. Small ambushes where the enemy would attempt to isolate a boat, mortar rain designed to flush out positions, or the sudden discovery of an enemy flanking movement. In one incident, rounds impacted near a position we just left. Enemy calculation closing fast. We had to move, relocate, and reset. In another, we recovered bodies and evidence that revealed the enemy's ability to pair a shooter in a tree with a spotter on the bank. That tactical pairing forced us to alter our approach. We began looking for the spotter's shadow as carefully as we sought the shooter. The psychological impact of the work is not negligible. Men who survived long river tours returned with a particular kind of restlessness. You learn to live with small confrontations of mortality. You register losses in a ledger that never feels complete. You also learn that your action matters in a way sometimes divorced from public recognition. The patrol boats that could pass safely because of your Overwatch. The squad that moved without incident thanks to suppressed observation. Those are the counts that mattered at the time. When the official tally came in and folks began referencing 109 confirmed kills in later histories, I thought about what those numbers represented. They represented confident suppression, safer movement, fewer patrols being ambushed. They represented a set of methods that other units started to replicate. They represented, too, the human cost on both sides of the engagement, a fact often lost when headlines focus on the number. After those months of operations, I was assigned to training and shared doctrine on long-range engagements from moving platforms. At training centers, we wrote about the importance of platform compensation, the micro-pause timing, and the importance of accurate range estimation from moving craft. These lessons were practical, often technical. Hold at an adjusted point where the hole's yaw is neutral, measure wind by water, ripple patterns using a reference grid, maintain a rigorous barrel cleaning schedule in humid climates. There is a temptation in retelling to let the story harden into something oversimplified. One shot makes a legend. In truth, legends grow from the repetition of methods and the adaptation of men to the environment. The 900-meter shot is emblematic because it compresses hours of training and dozens of smaller engagements into a dramatic moment. But the moment would not exist without the architecture that made it possible. If you watch the record closely, you also see the consequences for doctrine. The riverine environment demanded a particular blend of mobility and observation. Units recorded instances where enemy observation was suppressed and movement increased for friendly forces. Those entries feed into larger operational decisions: when to push, when to pull back, how to time river convoys to minimize exposure. That's a blunt way of saying my work helped change how people moved and how they thought about risk in literal environments. You might ask if there was any point where I felt like a hero. The answer is no. Heroism is a public label. In the field, we try to solve an immediate problem: keep men alive. The satisfaction, if it can be called that, is professional. You did your job, and the people you worked with returned. You don't count medals in the moment. You count mates with boots on their feet and stories to tell around a mess table. After the war, the historical record preserved the facts of the engagements, the confirmed hits, and the reports. My role shifted to training and advising on marksmanship and fieldcraft. Those later years involved making sure the method was transferable and that younger men could understand the minutiae that separate a good shot from a disastrous one. That work, quiet, technical, patient, felt more honest than any legend. If you take anything from this account, let it be this: extraordinary results in war rarely come from chance. They come from repeated small acts of preparation, from keeping an instrument clean and sighted, from learning to read a river as you read a clock. The 900-meter shot is memorable because it distilled that practice into a single moment. But the broader truth is less showy and more useful. Method matters. If you found value in hearing the facts, hit like, share responsibly, and subscribe. Not for me, but for the work of keeping accurate accounts alive. Leave a comment if you want sources or further reading. The debriefs, unit logs, and historical summaries provide the documentary basis for these accounts, and I'll point you to them so you can check the record yourself. This account is drawn from unit documents, debriefs, and historical summaries of riverine operations and sniper doctrine. My name is Odelbeer F. Waldron. The 900-meter shot is in the file. The methods and effects are in the reports. The rest is for historians and trainers to refine and for future soldiers to apply in pursuit of safer, better informed operations. Thank you for listening.